Good morning. We're here on our weekly webinar, and the topic today is using principles for multimedia learning. What can we learn from each other? And we have Pim from School with us today. I'm going to pass it over to you, Pim. Thanks for being with us here today.
Thank you, Naomi, for the introductions. Multimedia learning. That's what I want to discuss today because I realized that I've been using this already for quite some years, but only recently I really started to dive into the literature of it. I browsed a few articles and I learned that there are actually already principles in place to have good multimedia learning. So today I want to discuss those a little bit because I think you might be interested in this as well. And I want to relate them to the examples that I already had and explain those examples a little bit better, because for me it helped understand why good lectures helped, because I thought they were good lectures, but now I found some principles that I can relate to them. And I know for myself that they will help me improve my lectures, and hopefully you can take away something as well. I want to show you a picture. This is my first slide. So my name is Pim. I work at the New Media Center. That's something I wanted to address as well. So at the New Media Center, I see a lot of PowerPoints appear and a lot of presentations where somebody presents with a PowerPoint next to it and they talk on a knowledge topic. And you start to recognize the good from the bad or the good from the better, which is quite an interesting thing to discover, right? What things work, what things don't. And I realized that multimedia learning is one of the areas that discusses this in detail. So at the New Media Center, I train teachers, and I think I want to make this part of the topic in the courses that we have running up. So this is a bit my first trial into the topic. So your feedback, your discussion, and your input, I hope to use to further shape my expertise as well. So I hope we can start sharing. This is the guy I will be referring to a lot. This is Richard Mayer. He's an educational psychologist, and already since the 80s, he's been diving into the cognitive science of learning, and he came up with the multimedia learning theory. He actually did quite some research, or was involved in a lot of research in what kind of elements help better than others, and what are the conditions for this. And a few years ago, he developed 12 principles. And I think that's quite interesting, right? Because the cognitive science dives into how does your brain learn? And he translated those principles to PowerPoint slides, to the combination of text and images. And that's what I used as the basis for the theory part in my presentation today. What I will discuss today, the cognitive science and multimedia. So what am I actually talking about? What can we do? 3 different directions with some examples. And as we go along, I want to end up with, what's your favorite? What's the favorite example that you saw in this presentation? The favorite example you used by yourself? Sort of a bit of a reflection on what are we actually already doing, or what have you done, know you already do that works. So my goal is to share my lessons from an interesting article I read and open a conversation on improving educational messages. Multimedia and cognitive theory. On the left side, we see multimedia, which is defined by Richard Mayer as graphics and words to give a learning instruction. Multimedia means basically more than just using words to convey your message. In his research, he uses a lot of graphics and words and looked at that combination. From the cognitive science, I will dive into 3 principles: dual coding, limited capacity, and active processing. Did some of you already hear about this? Vaguely. So I didn't really dissect this entire paper, right? But I want to give you my interpretation with the background that I have as a teacher, as an educational scientist, and show you my interpretation on what I saw. And I want to do that by creating a drawing. So I'm going to explain a bit about the cognitive science on this. If I show this one, you should see my hand and my markers. So we start with a multimedia presentation, right? So we have words and we have images. This is my first test. It's not mirrored, right? It's exactly as it's supposed to be. So this is the multimedia presentation. What happens when you give a multimedia presentation to your learners or to your audience? It comes into the memory. And we start with the sensory memory. Those words you hear, so they come into your ears, and you will see the images that are used via your eyes. So those words and those images come into your visual sensories. The next part, we have 2 more memories to go. So I will draw those blocks already. Put my coffee a bit in the way. This is the short-term memory. And this is the long-term. And what I want to reach as a teacher is that the stuff that I tell reaches the long-term memory. We need to go over a few steps. It only stays in your sensory memory for a really short time. What happens there is we select, because not everything that we see or everything that we hear will move into the short-term memory. The things that do are sounds and images. And we start to organize those things. And when we organize this, we organize the sounds that we see, we organize the images, we are creating a verbal and visual model. So let me write down organize. Into a verbal and visual model. To let learning take place, those models in our short-term memory need to be connected to something in the long-term memory. So in the long-term memory, we already have a lot of knowledge in there. We know stuff that we learned before, previous lectures, previous experiences. And as soon as we are able to integrate the verbal and visual modules with the prior knowledge, it's stored in a long-term memory, and that's when learning takes place. I already mentioned 3 principles, and I want to write them down in this image as well. This sensory memory deals with the dual channel principle. So that assumes we have 2 channels, two options. So dual channel principle states that learning from words and images together works better than learning from words alone. So dual channel. In the short-term memory, there's another principle, because we only have limited capacity. We can't just put 100 words in there and assume that all those 100 words are in there. So that selecting deals with a limited capacity. And in order to have that long-term memory, there needs to be some kind of activation. There needs to be an active process of transforming it from the short-term memory to the long-term memory. Active process. That's the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, as Richard Mayer explained it, and how I interpreted it. I had another visual as well that I want to go briefly over. So this is the same image, a lot more words. But meaningful learning depends on the learning engaging a cognitive process during learning, including the selecting, organizing, and integrating of it. I realized I struggled a bit with the dual channel principle. I've written it down, so I want to give you the proper definition of it as well. People have separate information processing channels for visual and for verbal information. So that's not one sensory memory, there are actually two channels. So what? How can we use that dual coding principle, that limited capacity, and that active processing to come up with principles that we can actually use as teachers or support teachers, or when we need to give a presentation? There are three groups of things we can do. I think the first one is the most important one, that is avoid cognitive overload. You don't want to overload the brain with unnecessary information. So everything that's not the thing that you want them to remember should be gone. You want to manage the essentials, because even if you present everything with the right capacity, a topic might be too complex. So you might want to manage that they dissect this in the right way and are able to integrate and organize this later. And the third one is foster deep understanding. You want to make sure that they're also actually motivated to use the capacity that a learner or your audience has. I want to make this a little bit clear by diving into the principles. I present them just in words, and I hope they become a bit more lively with the examples that I show you. This is the first slide. So what can we do to avoid cognitive overload? We have 5 principles in here. So I started with the biggest one. I also think this is one of the most important ones. Bishop Mayer describes it as the one with a lot of effect. Coherence. Let me check. People learn better when extra materials excluded and not included. Signaling means people learn better when the essential material is highlighted. Redundancy, so you learn better from graphics and narration than from graphics, narration, and on-screen text. This is a bit explained in the image that I had. So if you combine words and images, that works fine. But if you also use on-screen text, it already means you have two to the visual sensories. So redundancy means images and spoken word combined. Back to my PowerPoint. Spatial, place things together that belong together, and temporal, mention things at the same time. I want to show you one video, and I realize I need to stop sharing my screen a little bit because I forgot to include sound. And in that video, that's an example of one of the courses that I've been involved in the library, and one of my colleagues recorded a video on a search plan, which is a tool we use within the library. And this is one example of signaling. So we are cutting 1 minute into the video. She just explained something about a research question, and now she talks about concepts, synonyms, and related terms.
We will use our research question to identify concepts and determine the input we give in the database. A concept comes directly from the research question. Let's therefore return to our question. My research question contains 5 concepts, which are portable, system, waste, water, and purification. In your final query, you will combine these.
So this was the example that I wanted to show. I hope the sound was okay. It might be a little bit soft, right? The thing that I wanted to show, she used PowerPoint to record this video. And in PowerPoint, she showed the question and she signaled the concepts that she wanted to highlight. So signaling, crossing, putting a square around it is one of the things to direct the learner's attention and make sure that they focus on the essentials. I have another video that I want to show you, which deals with a different example, the redundancy, which said people learn better from visuals in combination with spoken word instead of text. I'm going to go into the video.
On your topic, you need to have context on your topic of research. So, who are the important authors in my field? What are the important journals?
I cut you off right at the important point. So, context, and now,
who are the important authors in my field? What are the important journals in my field? What are the important affiliations, universities, or organizations in my field? You can.
This was one thing. I made a storyboard actually for this video, and what I did there in that storyboard, instead of having those images, I had words, authors, papers, and institutions. Then I realized why words, and this was before I read about this multimedia learning, but apparently it works better to work with the visuals, and this was really a nice and easy way to do things because I had those concepts, those one-word things. I just went to Pixabay, one of the license-free image repositories, typed in that word, and I could really easily just pick the image that represented my story. And suddenly I was in line with one of the multimedia learning principles and actually can help people use their cognitive capacity as needed. So that was the second example. I also want to go back to the drawing because I have a third one. So in my PowerPoint, we've discussed signaling, redundant, and I think that spatial principle is an interesting one as well. You saw me draw. This was the drawing I made. Now I want to show you one of the test drawings I made, and that illustrates actually the spatial aspect. I need to turn it upside down. So this is the image that I had before. You can see that I numbered 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. It works way better to place the concepts, the names at the location, because now I have to look for it. I'm using cognitive capacity to make sense of the image. Well, on here, I place the words right where they belonged, even there's different colors. Small tricks that can help your learners more easily understand what you're explaining. Avoid cognitive overload. Remove the things that's not there. Back to my presentation, I realized you need to be able to do a bit of practice what you preach. I have some extras in here as well. This blue doesn't serve any purpose for the story that I'm conveying. This logo doesn't. This one doesn't. When I'm sharing my screen, I might have my Windows taskbar below. Teams already has a lot of distractions. So to make the rest of this presentation a little bit more coherent, I'm getting rid of the blue bar. I'm getting rid of the numbers. The second principle, the second group of principles was about managing the essentials. So if you have a more complex concept, if the cognitive level of your learners is lower than the story you're trying to explain, these are a few things that you can consider. Segmenting, based on this research, they found out that it works better to have 10-second clips instead of one video of 2 minutes. But after every 10 seconds, they could just fast forward the video. So click 10 seconds forward, click 10 seconds forward. It's a bit counterintuitive because you might think, hey, if they skip, they might miss concepts. But it has proven that people recall better information after having that freedom to segment their course, their materials. It allows them to create their own mental image, right? That visual and verbal model. And if they can do that at their own pace, they can decide where they pause longer or faster. And I think videos is one great example of doing this. This is one of the images from that paper where they actually tested what if we every 10 seconds have a continue button. So they actively had to click on continue, and it has proven to be effective. So having to click continue, continue, continue allowed for better processing of the information. Pre-training deals with, it works better if you remind them of an image before actually showing it. So giving a bit of activating the prior knowledge. And the modality principle. People learn better from a multimedia lesson when words are presented in spoken form. So instead of the words I showed on text, using spoken form. I think the example I showed last is also includes that a little bit. The third and the last group of principles deals with foster deep understanding. So how can you motivate students to actually use their capacity? What can you do in your multimedia learning presentations? Some basic principles that might feel that make sense and are actually proven. Personalization. So use a human voice instead of a computerized voice. At the VR Zone part of the New Media Center, I see some great examples of artificial intelligence where they could use voices that actually sounded pretty human-like, which might work great for promotional videos. But if you actually want to deal with learning, that personal aspect of your own voice works better. Actually, this was the voice principle. The personalization principle is speak to them. This is an interesting thing that I often see when people write a script before they come to the recording studio. They start writing stuff down for their video, like they're writing in paper. So, however, in this and this is stated that it gets a really formal way of speaking to actually start motivating them, use your words like you would use in a conversation like this. Embodiment is the one that I found really interesting. It's what I try to practice here today. I use my top camera to actually use human gestures to draw a picture as we went along. And those human gestures, so not just show the image that I also had in my presentation, but actually bringing you along how this image is constructed. This is the image I'm talking about. Allows to actually use the cognitive capacity that you have. That was one of the images I wanted to show as well. And I think that helps me to move on. So that was the embodiment. For me, to start wrapping this part a bit up, I showed you examples how to avoid cognitive overload with a few of the videos. I showed you a screenshot of how to manage the essentials. I think segmenting is an interesting one in there. And I showed you a practice live, what embodiment can do. And now my question to you is, what's your favorite? Where do you have opinions?
I have an opinion.
Yes, please, Alessandra.
So I really like the embodiment, so the fact that you draw in front of us, because for my way of learning things, it helped me follow your mental process through what you were explaining. So that for me really worked very nicely.
Nice, thanks for sharing, Alessandra. Kelvin, I see you have your hand raised as well.
Yeah, for me, the segmenting aspect, I think, I really learned the importance of this when I got into blended learning and was trying to make very short videos because of attention span. I think sometimes when you're so used to lecturing in a class, we think in timescales of a lecture. And we make transitions and we make the pauses naturally, but to us, it's one lecture. So it's even to the point now that even in my lectures, when I have PowerPoint slides, I put visual pause slides in that is just, you know, a color with like a title to help me with just, you know, almost like a palette cleanser, like no visual noise, no crazy diagrams, no equations. Let's just, and that's really even helped me in my lectures.
But that's also for yourself, right? Because it builds in a sort of anchor of ease to stop talking for a little bit.
Yeah.
Which indeed allows them, yeah, I think that's an interesting one. So just an empty slide.
Well, often I'll just have what I do, because, and this is a bit of a challenge, because this is another point that we need to somehow break that trend, is we design our PowerPoint slides as notes. I think so. You gave the example of, you know, you put an image, and I do that now, but I also usually include the word, because I know a lot of students are downloading those slide decks as their notes. So I usually have just a colorful slide, and normally I'll have like a single word on it that's just kind of highlighting the next topic we're gonna talk about, and then that's useful in the notes. But I try and make it as visually unpolluted as possible.
I think you address an interesting point, right? And I'm curious to what other people think about this as well. So you can use the chat as well. So the fact that you designed your PowerPoint more as a note for the students in case they don't pay attention when you're actually presenting, it affects the people who are actually there, right? Because you're presenting them with a lot of noise. Do people recognize this challenge? Have they been thinking about this?
Yeah, I recognize it because these principles, I think either you or someone else presented them about 1 or 2 years ago as well, and I've included a lot more graphics in last year in my presentations, and less text, and then the students complained.
Really?
Yeah, they complained because they said we can't, as Kelvin said, we can't use them as notes, we can't use them for studying. Because now all we see is pictures, and if we weren't there at the lecture, or if we don't actually listen back to the lecture recording, because last year of course the lectures were recorded, then they're useless to me. Especially the non-Dutch students complained a lot. They want to have as much text on the slides as possible.
Ooh, I think this is an interesting point to dive further in, Frederica. So I'm writing it down for myself, but I also saw that John Allen and Roel had a comment, so I want to address that first. And then maybe we can come back to this, because I think that's the other side, right, of this. I didn't really consider this, but we should. John Allen.
Yeah, I think I had the same experience. So I haven't received complaints, but yeah, I've thought about it myself. Where I've tried to design lectures slides more consciously for presenting, so limiting the words and making it as visual as possible, and then just having you just have just a picture or something. But then I've realized, yeah, if you're downloading this afterwards, which is also how I used to study when I was a student, right? You go to Brightspace, you download all the slides, and then when you're revising for the exam, you go through all the slides again. Yeah, you're not going to have a clue, right? If it's just a picture. So sometimes I try to like maybe put in just 1 or 2 words just to highlight the key concept or the key thing that is being shown here. Or what I sometimes do is I make use of the notes section, right? So in PowerPoint you can add notes, and when you print it as a PDF, there is I think it's the handout option, but you can print the slides in such a way that those notes are also printed. And I think that can be a way, without having to like make 2 sets of slides. You can make the slides to be presented, and then in the notes you can put, let's say, the missing information.
I think that's a great. I want to show you my PowerPoint slide, because that's actually the same solution I'm using. More as to be honest, more as a reminder of myself. But you might have realized when I was speaking, I look at my notes because I put the definitions of stuff in there, because I didn't want to have that entire text on my slides. So a lot of things is copy pasted from things I could just read out loud in case I miss my story. And for me, that's something that I also use when I have to make lectures, right? Shall I see if I can find the export to handout option. That's what you mentioned, John Allen.
Yeah.
Save as Adobe PDF. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's in.
You
That's
have to print it because it's a print option.
Right.
So instead of full page slides,
you have them with notes page. So that's something you can experiment, right?
Yeah.
Outline. Nice. Outline's also nice because all the text that is in there is shared. Thanks. Ro, I think you also had your hand raised, right?
Yeah. Yeah, what I wanted to add is the thing that I have as well with while following a presentation or while giving a presentation, it often happens that your mind just goes away and you're thinking about something, or you have to take some extra time to accept something which was said, and then you reconnect. And then the slide is very important, because a good slide helps you to get back to the point where the presenter is. And that's sometimes if your slides get too sketchy and too little information, then you're actually lost. You're like, oh, this is nice. This is an icon of some sort of gears which are working together. But what are the gears, and what does this try to explain me, and what are we talking about now, right? So there is an optimum there. I think.
I think that's a great thing, right? That reminds me a bit of the third group of principles, that fostering that deep learning. You need to motivate people to actually use their cognitive capacity for the stuff that you want them to learn. So the drawing I just made is, I think, also an example, right? You mentioned gears and other things, and if you lose.
The drawing was great.
But if you step in halfway through, if I would show this to somebody walking now in the hallway, they would not recognize what I've written down. My drawing is not perfect, it's not nice, maybe you cannot even read it, but because I was using words while I was drawing, all of you do remember what it is about. So there isn't, I agree, if you have a lecture, and that's a bit the point Calvin made, right? If you design for a 45-minute lecture, there are different considerations to be made as well, because what if you lose them for 5 minutes, which is not long, but what if that's the crucial point of information? So
yeah, I think with relation to some of this stuff, we've put ourselves in a position where students expect that slide decks are notes, and I think sometimes we have to recognize when is a small reader for a topic needed, when is elaboration in Brightspace needed, when is the textbooks that we have for students as resources is the backup for it, and reestablish that a lecture is, like, lecture slides are not lecture notes. They're just tools that we use to explore. And that's a challenge, because if all the other courses are doing it one way, then students want you to do it that way as well. Like, I encountered that when I first started working with blended learning, and students were like, you can't ask me to prepare for a lecture because none of my other lecturers do. And it took a lot of, effort to try and to reset and make that. And now students are much more comfortable with it.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. So I realized that a lot of the principles that I recognized were indeed more from the online learning part that I'm involved in than that they are from the live lecturing part. Because there is, as Frederica pointed out, I'm really happy with that comment, they feel it's useless because they expect an explanation of notes, so to say.
And I found it strange with some of my slide decks for when I make an online video. They're terrible notes, because half of my slides are like, it's a blank slide and I just write a script in the notes section, and it's like, well, I'm going to be talking here, it's going to be my face, and maybe a word will pop up. So it's really strange how we put ourselves in that mindset, and because they can watch a short video over and over again and it's a very contained thing, we have a higher expectation that they can go back and extract and take their own notes from it.
Yeah, I think that, so we just started a MOOC from the library on open science, and I needed to dive a bit into the content as well. And I started to realize I don't actually watch those videos. What I do is I skip to I use the transcript, because edX has a really nice way of having the image and the transcript next to it. I read the transcript, click on the things where I assume a nice image pops up. And that's how I go over it, because that's my way of making that mental image. So I'm also not expecting that people download the PowerPoint and expect to understand the full story, while in lecturing, usually that is what we do, right? Because we have the time to explain everything in that much detail, maybe.
Yeah.
I saw you made a comment in the chat as well, Kelvin. I think in response to Frederica, I think we need to set expectations clearly at the beginning of the class to minimize these issues. I think that's what you've been doing a lot with your blended, right?
Yeah, and with other things, I recognize if I do something different, it's students are, there's like a mob mentality. It's like, well, nobody else does this, so it's not fair. So sometimes, you know, you just have to be upfront, explain, this is what we expect. I actually do that in my live lecturing, where I actually have problems that I solve out, and I say, I don't post the written solutions. I do give the solution in class on a smartboard, and students are like, well, can't you just digitize a smartboard? And I'm like, no, I know you need to write this down yourself. And there's a recording of it. You can go back and look at it if you miss stuff, but I know for your learning, writing it down and going through all those steps is necessary. So you get a bit of resistance, but if you're upfront about it and you're firm to it, then it's okay.
I think that's a great example, right? Making a sum. Frederica, how did you solve this feedback, or how did you deal with this feedback?
Actually, it's what Kelvin said. Sorry, I don't have access to the chat function, so I didn't see your chat. But no, this is what we did this year. Because we're teaching more in hybrid mode, we're making expectations much clearer at the start. And this is also the same for the blended learning, and also where students have to do some preparation in advance. We make it very clear. We're not going to repeat in class what they're supposed to have studied at the start. If they haven't done it, tough luck. They just missed that piece of information. And the students, in the first couple of weeks, they really complained. And then after a while, they got used to it. But it's the same also, an argument we have with whether, if you're teaching in hybrid mode, whether you should or should not record the lectures. And we now actually have decided not to record the lectures anymore.
I think that's an interesting choice as well. And I think the feedback you got on your, hey, we made all of our slides more visual instead of lecture notes. When I heard Kelvin explain that he did a sum or an exercise that he written out, for me, that's a perfect example that I would also write down, because you can actually follow along. But I would not do that for every bit and piece, right? For some things, you do still need the text. So by knowing those principles, they're not rules. So that's one of the things I wanted to emphasize, because what I sometimes tend to do is suddenly I want to make drawings of everything. One, that's not efficient from my side, because I don't have the time to make drawings or find visuals for everything. But I do have a prioritization always in my lectures. I know the core concept that I do want them to take away. Maybe I have two, and that's when I really want to focus on, hey, did I actually not overload them, dissect the complex issues, and motivate them to actually do this? So it helps us reflect a bit.
Yeah, it's also a case, and I think Kelvin also mentioned this, that you need to be on one line with the rest of the group that's teaching the course, because I was replacing my presentations with more pictograms and pictures and less words, but the other ones weren't. And that's one of the reasons why the students complained, is because they said, okay, the other teachers still print the full version, why don't you?
You actually make them work, right? Which
well,
I think,
yeah, in a different way. So I think you need to
with
be
their mind.
with the rest of the team, and that's another thing too. But that's a cultural thing as well. Especially some of the older lecturers are loath to change.
But I think you also need to confront, sometimes be confrontational with that and reflect it back with them and be a little bit cheeky and sort of say, well, you know, these other students are 9, 10 students and you're not. Why not? And when they sort of, so you can sort of say, not everyone is the same.
Yeah.
And everyone has different approaches and different expectations and different goals. But sometimes just kind of reflecting it back on them is quite an interesting thing, because they have a very tunnel vision view of things sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's also, I like the point that you raised as well. So 8, 9, 10 students, I think they benefit from this, right? Because they are already making mental images and processing it to prior knowledge. I can imagine those lecture notes are really suitable for the people who are happy with a 6 or a 7 as well. So there's expectation management from both sides to that degree, right?
But my experience is actually a little bit different. It's sometimes the 8 or 9 students who really want those detailed notes, because they've established fixed processes for studying and actually exceeding. And actually, sometimes the students that are, you know, just getting sufficient or are struggling, that actually benefit from the more visual slides because they're not overwhelmed. You know, you are actually reaching them in a lecture a little bit more. And so a lot more concepts may sit with them.
True. Yeah, good point.
So it's
immediately understand what you're saying. I see those students in front of me as well.
But I think, yeah, you have to balance it. So for, like I said, with my blended course, I don't share my slide decks anymore. I have all the theory is given in blended learning videos. So those are posted on Brightspace. But then I try and address certain things like, okay, I'm going to show this complex slide that describes a problem that I'm going to solve. Brightspace has that problem written out. So you don't have to waste time writing down what a question says, right? So you have to recognize those sorts of little things. And then I also try and put a small summary at the end for every lecture and say, well, here are some of the key concepts that I think were hit that you should, and then there's enough with the blended learning videos that they can go back and make their own notes if they haven't quite gotten it.
Yeah, I like that.
But you have to structure it for them somehow.
You're basically giving them some kind of handout where they can make their own notes, right? So explaining your structure, in my experience, also works really, really well. One of the other, so I really got stuck on that. People find it useless when you just pointed the numbers, and it reminded me of an example of somebody who came to me and wanted to revise his presentation. It was on copyright, and he did the exact same thing as you described, right, with making lectures notes. He actually said to me, I want to send those slides over, so if they didn't remember or were not present, I could send them the slides and they still have all the information. And I said to them, but what's your goal of this presentation? He wanted to create awareness and make his face known. So I said, you have those slides, so just put them in the back. But use those 4 or 5 slides for that half an hour to tell your story. And then refer them to, because you already have it, right? So it would be a waste to just skip it out. He was really happy with that advice and felt like he gave a more practical presentation. But so there are ways of suiting both, but I can agree as well, Kevin, if you are really stuck on setting expectations up front, it can be a disadvantage by sharing those. So then indeed you get rid of them.
If you're going to develop this into some sort of, fixed lecture or something, I would really encourage you to target graduate students and professors, not in the context of teaching a lecture at first, because we've discussed some of these sorts of things. But where I see a huge need for this is in things like conferences and things like that. And the nice thing there is you always have the boundary condition. If you're presenting at a conference, you have a paper. And I'm always frustrated with, people who want to put everything from their paper in their short presentation. And that might be a context in terms of reaching the academic staff, but even graduate students, of realizing that your presentation isn't your paper. It is the advertisement or the trailer or the teaser to make people want to read your paper.
Nice. I'm actually gonna experiment with that I'm having a pilot this afternoon with indeed PhD students who are about to create a 2-minute pitch on their research. I've asked them to prepare, so we're going to practice in the studio. And indeed, the second part, because I've looked at their scripts, and most of them try to summarize their research, what they've done, the important outcomes. But if you have a 2-minute pitch, you want to inspire, right? You want to, you mentioned an advertisement. I say you want to put something from yourself in it. Don't just share the outcomes and that you've won a great prize. No. What did you do when you were out there doing your experiments? What's the thing that stuck out? What does it mean for me? Indeed, get
and all those principles in terms of, you know, the classic thing is a student takes a figure from their paper and sticks it in their presentation. And it's usually terrible in a presentation. There's way too much information on it. It's way too much to digest. So some of the principles you showed, I think, would be very useful to kind of show that.
Yeah, great. Good thing. I actually didn't put much of this in there, but I now have it, so why not show it? This reminds me a little bit of one of the examples that I showed. In my view, a lot of the reason that people create lectures that are basically lecture notes is because they start with PowerPoint. They have the PowerPoint slides from previous years, or they have a PowerPoint slides from somebody else. And you continue building on this, right? But I think to actually get a good story, you don't want to start with the slides because that's a fixed format. You should think about your story first. So what's the goal you want to reach? What do you want to achieve? Write down your narrative from that and then start looking at the visuals. Because then suddenly you don't need to have a visual at every sentence. You can actually put emphasis with help of your slides. So that might help you as a bit of an exercise to actually use simple columns. First start with your script and now look for the images that can be attached to it. Instead of having 10 slides for 10 words.
Or using the mute button, the screen mute button in a lecture room. I started doing this a lot more, where you know, I'll be lecturing and there'll be a slide and then I'm going to start talking about something and I'll just go and I'll turn off the screen to sort of signal to them to focus on me and listen to me. What's on the screen is not so important. And I realized the importance of this again from doing all those blended learning videos and how important it was for students to see your face and connect with you. And sometimes you need to, like you said, signal to them that all they need to be doing right now is listening to you.
I think that's a great way, because that reminds me of that coherence principle, right? I think that's great because you're talking, but you're not just talking with words. You're using your hands, your body, which is also a visual representation. So the tip of putting your screen off, nice. Never realized or never made that connection. I think that's, is there a short key for it, or do you just plug out the cable?
Well, in the lecture rooms on the control panel for the media, there is a mute button for the screen, so you can turn it off. But I actually, just to remind myself, I literally just put a blank slide with a black background. Does the same thing.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, the other fast way of doing that, if you're in presentation mode in PowerPoint, if you press W, you get a white slide, which is blank, and if you press B, you get a black slide, which is blank.
Let me check. Oh yeah, the B works. Oh wait, W. Yeah. Oh, that's nice. You didn't see, right?
No, you're not sharing your screen, so don't worry. But yeah.
W and the B. Nice. It's also a nice trick if you want to mess with your lecturer. Suddenly a student presses the black thing and I think we're out of time.
Yeah.
Thanks, Naomi.
Yeah, so actually, we're getting close to time on this actual session. So I want to mention that next week we're going to be doing takeaways from two different events. One, Epic, is next week. I know it won't fully be done, but we will do some of that, but also we'll be sharing out some from the JTEL conference here that I'm in right now in Greece. So between the two, we'll do a little bit of sharing out and just kind of open discussion like we normally do for next week. So I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. And thanks, Pim, for speaking here today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I want to share before you stop a few last links. The paper that I referred to, one link that has a nice visual overview of all the principles, and an announcement for the training for how to present in the studio.
Perfect.
That's in the chat right now. Thanks for this opportunity.
When actually is this training, Pim?
Sorry?
When is this training, this course for the presenting in the studio?
The 15th
I haven't
of
got
June.
access to the chat.
Oh, the 15th of June. And if you go
Right.
to TU Delft tls.opleidingsportaal.nl, that's where you
Too
can.
late for me. I need it now.
You can always
I'll
send
see.
me.
Yeah, I'll see if I can add you because I think I'm not sure if you're in here, but as long as you're part of the team, then you can see the chat.
Yeah, but at the moment I'm logged in through a different institute, and that's the problem with Teams.
Yeah, actually, I'll send you a message on the side, and we can try to get you in a different way, so that'll make it a little bit easier for you. But I think that does wrap up our session for today. So I'll go ahead and end the recording. Thanks so much, Pim.